anybody else comes on, we can admit them in a moment or two. I want to welcome you all to the Artist Outlook, which is our monthly virtual interview with artists that are either in our permanent collection or are showing at the Appleton. And we are thrilled this evening to have Andrew Grant with us. I'll introduce myself very quickly. I'm Patricia Tomlinson. I'm the Curator of Exhibitions at the Appleton Museum of Art. And I want to welcome you, Andrew. And could you please tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's definitely an honor and pleasure to be here. A little bit about myself, I'll do the art history version of myself. Definitely started out young drawing, and I actually became not interested, but actually became serious about art actually a little bit late. When I went to UCF, I did study. I took a few courses in art history because it's always just been a passion of mine since I was younger. But actually, it wasn't until a few years after I graduated UCF, because I graduated with a degree in communications, and I always still drew. I'd never had any serious lessons, or I didn't have any instructions like instructors at that time. But I came across a school in Winter Park, Florida, named Crealdi School of Art, and I actually teach there now. So I actually started taking formal classes in actually maybe 2008, 2009. And it was there that I knew a little bit of art history again, dabbled in the arts, but it wasn't until I got there that I actually saw some incredible instructors and incredible teachers. There was formal classes you could take, and it's a non-for-profit school, so you're not going there to get a degree or a certificate or anything like that. You're really just going there to kind of get your own learning. You kind of learn at your own pace, and I caught the bug there. My first major instructor that I would say was Terry Trumbar Norris. She was the oil painting instructor at the time. And I took workshops and classes with her. I would stay after class and say, hey, do you mind if I wash your brushes for you? That type of thing. So I formed a relationship with her. From there, just kept studying on my own, because now I was introduced to seeing working artists. And that was something that I hadn't seen. Because in school, when I say school, I meant college. It was what I saw and what I noticed was that, me personally, was that to get into the arts, it was more so graphic design, or you're going to be working in some type of animation. I didn't know any artists that were actually out there creating paintings that I've only seen in books and that type of thing at that time. So seeing Terry's paintings, and then now meeting other artists, she's saying, hey, do you know about this artist? And telling me, and that type of conversation led to me seeing a whole world out there that's been going on for a long period of time, that this is a real thing. So from there, after studying at Crealdi for a little bit, I needed something a little bit more rigorous. I needed something more directed in kind of what I wanted to do, which was academic art, because I found some academic artists from certain time periods, and I found that there was artists actually out there doing that. There were schools doing that. So that led me to my next instructor and good friend, Carol Broman. She's probably she said she was going to join, so she's probably here. So I'll try not to embarrass her. So I went and studied with Carol Broman for a short period of time, and I actually had to relocate for a little bit because she was in Fort Myers. I was in Orlando, and Fort Myers is about almost a 3-hour drive, 3.5-hour drive. So I quit my job and I relocated to Fort Myers for a little bit, studied with Carol. And from there, my self-training just spiraled, and full circle now. I now teach at Crealdi. I teach life drawing there. I hold workshops there. So it's kind of like this whole little 10-year circle that happened, where I started there as first oil painting, and then and now I teach oil painting there. So it's kind of interesting. So that's pretty much my art history story, crammed in about 4 minutes.
Well, that's wonderful. And it kind of, what you mentioned offhand a couple of times, sort of segues beautifully into my next question. Tell us about your influences. Who, what, What movement influences you?
Right. So so Terry, she's her art is based in realism. Her favorite artist, probably to this day still is Chardin. So because she's a still life painter, so she would paint onions and pots and things that there's a beautiful color harmony that she would put together, and she would bring her works to class, and I was sitting there like, this is witchcraft. I didn't, because I haven't seen that many like real oil paintings up close. Like I grew up with prints in my house. Like my mother, she had prints of oil paintings in the house, and actually a lot of them were women. So I think maybe that kind of seeped into my. I know we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but that kind of seeped into my subconscious, I believe, because a lot of the paintings were of women and children and those type of things. But I hadn't seen too many real oil paintings, and then had the artist standing right next to me, right? So she from there, me looking up the artist that she was influenced by led me to find probably one of the biggest influences now in regards to technique, work ethic, and just career would be William Bouguereau, 19th century painter from France. I think the French in the 19th century were some of the most, that was probably one of the most dominant art movements that 100 years. You can definitely make a case for the Spanish and the Germans, but a lot of them wanted to go to France because that's where it was happening. And then that just led me. I'm really a sponge for information, so that just led me back to researching other artists, other paintings, and going from there. But influences, definitely one of the major ones would be in the 19th century. Then if you take it back a little bit further, one of the paintings of artists that actually, when I went to the Met some years ago, or over 10 years ago, that's my first time there. I saw Rembrandt paintings for the first time, and that was magic. I read, prior to that, you read about Rembrandt, and it wasn't until I saw his paintings in person that it just changed everything. But I would say a lot of academic art from the Italians, the Germans, the French, and my influences come from artists that actually have a good handle on the human form, and telling narratives, and maybe even leaving a little bit of surrealism in their work. So that's pretty much the major influence when I first started.
Okay, wonderful. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've mentioned this, I think, on other artist outlooks as well. Seeing things virtually is a very good teaching tool. It's a powerful thing. However, seeing a work of art in person cannot be replicated. It's just its own completely amazing thing. So yeah, it's a whole nother ball of wax, if you will, seeing an art, because you can see the brush strokes, you can see the luminosity, you can see the glazes that they applied and how they applied them. Would you agree, Andrew? Oops, you're muted. Hold on. Can you unmute, Andrew?
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Sorry, that was a little
Okay.
technical difficulty there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I fully agree. When I was in school, and my art history teachers were putting the slides up, and you're seeing the paintings. And one thing that you also mentioned was just seeing how the paint interacts with light, real, like actual light, right? And also scale. Scale is very important. We live in a time now where we have our phones, we have our computers, and we look at art, and it's interesting because even on I'll use my own website for an example. I have paintings that I do that are 3 by 3 inches, right? And then I have paintings on there that are like maybe 4 foot, 3 foot paintings, but they'll show up at the same scale, right? So you're not really seeing the difference and seeing what went into each size. And when I got a chance to actually visit museums, and then I've been going to museums in Florida and New York and these different places, is the scale really matters, because if you walk in front of a painting in its life size, it actually affects you on a psychological level, depending on how it's painted, of course, whether it be by the color, whether it be by the forms. So yeah, scale and seeing things in person is a completely different story.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. So on that note, why don't we move to some slides and actually look at your wonderful art? So let me get this up. So let's talk about this one. We're going sort of in chronological order. And I'm grateful that you included some of your earlier pieces here, because I think it's really interesting to see what you did before versus what you did now. Would you like to talk about that a little?
Absolutely. And I made sure that I only sent you stuff that I was happy with. I didn't want to send you any terrible figurative work that I did 10 years ago, right? So yes. So again, this painting you see here is part of the influence of Terry and Carol, both of them together, because with Terry, she didn't paint a lot of figurative work. She did mainly the landscapes and still life, like I mentioned. And when I worked with Carol, a lot of the learning that an artist will undertake in the beginning is actually learning from still life. It's setting up objects with different textures, and you can light them the way you want. They don't move, they don't breathe, and you can just take your time and really get an understanding of what you're painting. So I did this one, and it's probably the same year that I was done studying with Carol. I moved back to Orlando to get life back in order and get back on track and still study. So this is something that I just did in my own time. The statue that you see there, I actually purchased down there. I went to an actual antique store, and they had a section that had a bunch of African artifacts and figurines, and this one really called to me because again, it was the female form, and it had nice texture to it. It was chipped in places, and I was like, okay, I could paint this. So I actually attempted to paint this in her studio when I was studying, and the painting, it was like a disaster. So that's why I didn't send that one to you. So I have another painting of this. So this is one that I did when on my own time, and I wanted to put different aspects of I think this is where the narrative part of me started, because even though it's a still life, I still try to tell a small story. So if you look at it, it's obviously a pregnant figurine. The black cloth, you can consider that like the womb of any woman. You know, it's always the darkness there. Each bead is almost symbol. There's not, I don't know how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there's 9 peeking there. So that kind of symbolizes the birth, 9 months. Well, I know the weeks are a little bit different, but and then the flowers. So and then the title. I like playing with the title because that leads you into what the picture might be about. So even when I was doing still life, I still tried to tell a little story, and that's why I called it Origin.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's go on to another one.
Ooh.
Preservation, and I love this title, and that's really intriguing because of course, that word can mean so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
You like to talk about your thoughts on
Absolutely.
this?
Yeah. So again, this is more into there's a little bit of narrative there. It's a still life, but I tried to capture a little bit of a story with the title and with what I was seeing. So I think I found this at a local store. I can't remember where I got the rhino, but it wasn't anything expensive or exotic. It was just a carved rhino, and it's actually, to me, it would be the mother rhino protecting the baby, because if you see the baby underneath her, a lot of people maybe miss that. Um, and then I use some of the elements for just composition purposes, because I named it preservation because a lot of times rhinos are hunted for their horns. So you see kind of like the gold encapsulates the horn on the rhino. Preservation also comes from the box. So the box, people can put jewelry, you can put valuable items. And then preservation, she's also preserving the offspring that you see under the mouth there. So even when I was putting still lifes together, it was fun for me to try to tell a story with it. And this one is one that I still have in my studio. I would never ever sell this, because this was actually the first painting that made me feel like I can do this. Right, I did it at Carol's studio. Prior to this, I've never done anything as well as I thought at this time. I mean, I still think it's a very nice painting, and at that time, it was like the best thing I ever did. So this one is actually hanging in my studio now, and it's probably I have 2 children, so this is my third.
That's very cool. Very cool. Let's move on through time here. So now we've kind of fast forwarded to 2020. And this is quite small. It's, as you mentioned, your 3x3s. This is also a 3x3.
Yes. So yeah, we fast forward 10 years and I started doing figurative work almost exclusively. And still life elements will get added to the figurative work to tell the story and move the story along. And the AMG series is what I call this. It started just out of things that I actually saw other artists doing online, because I saw artists painting like little miniature paintings, and I was always intrigued by them because I was intrigued by the fact that it can add so much information to just a small canvas or panel. So in between like larger projects, I said, you know what, let me order some and see where I can take this. So I ordered a box of 3x3s. I like to prepare my own panels, so it was gessoed and everything the same way I would any larger piece. And I tried it and I failed, and I was like, this is a lot harder than it looks. And I of course, kept practicing with it. And then after I did the first one, AMG 1, I was like, okay, so this can be something that I can kind of add to my repertoire of work that I do. And I maybe one or two a month, depending. And I almost do these and also in almost like small series. So some of them will be like cropped portraits. Some of them that are in the show currently at the Appleton, they're of hands and different things. So these are like a playground for me. I don't follow any rules really. I just say if I'm gonna use the brightest color out of the tube, I will. If I want to play with composition, if I want to play with flat geometric shapes, I'll do that. So in my larger work, I'm more conscious of like the how I'm gonna put that together. But these is I just have fun. Whatever strikes me at the time to do, I do that. And this one I wanted to focus on just having a black and white background, strong geometric shapes, and play with the composition. And these actually can fit in the palm of your hand, so it's really interesting when you see these in person. And also one last thing on as far as the title goes, the AMG is my initials, Andrew M. Grant, but it's also stands for a mini gem. So I like again to play with the titles. So that's done with that.
Perfect. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to ask you what the title meant. So let's look at another one. And in Andrew's show that's currently up at the Appleton, he has given us 6 of these. So they're in their own little space, which I think works extremely well. They sort of play off each other and dialogue off each other. And in this one, we're starting to see at least in the array that we've done here, we're starting to see some of your sort of surrealism. And I think that's one of the things that I find extremely intriguing about your work is obviously that's a very realistically rendered hand. However, these little spheres or seeds or beads, if you will, are all floating in midair around the hand.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about what influences surrealism or does not have on your work?
Sure. Yeah, when I was younger, another thing, an interest of mine is I used to be really into magic. I actually still am. So back in the day with VHS and those shows used to come on, the magic shows, I used to record them and I used to rewind them and like how do they do that type of thing? And so I was always interested in magic, like sleight of hand and that type of thing. So art to me, when done well, it still comes off like magic to me. So when I add little elements of surrealism at all, it brings back that childhood interest in magic. So I try to put things in there that wouldn't happen in real life. I think that's part of the fun of art is when you see things that don't happen in the natural world. So anytime I can put that in there and it balance and it kind of plays with your mind because again, like you said, there's floating beads. That bracelet is defying gravity right now. So it's kind of like what's going on. That kind of adds a little bit of mystery and it kind of adds just a little touch of otherworldliness to it. I'm interested in I like Dali, Salvador Dali. And I like what I like about him, I think mostly is how he took taking the waking state, like right when you wake up and that last image you see from a dream, how can you add that? And I don't think my work will ever go as far as as Dali would push it in regards to that type of surrealism. I just like taking little bits of that and sprinkling it throughout because I still like it grounded in reality, but I like just a hint of something that kind of throws you off, or you're kind of like taking a second look at, like, okay, what is that? Like, what's going on? So that's what I try to do with this one.
Okay. Well, it's wonderful. Your next one is entitled Molting, and I really enjoy that title too, because obviously you see this semi-shrouded figure, but once again, molting can mean quite a few things. This also isn't a very large painting either.
Mhm.
So how do you, I guess what I want to ask is, how do you decide whether something's going to be quite large or quite small? Or, I mean, do you have a preconceived notion, or did she just manifest in a small format, boom, done?
Right. So do you want the truth or you want me like something poetic?
I want the truth, Andrew.
All right. So when you invited me to this show in 2019, I started and we were painting, and I realized that all the pieces really couldn't be 6 foot, 5 foot, 4 feet tall. I would have loved for that to happen, but again, I do like smaller paintings for many reasons because I like testing myself on different scales and seeing what I can pull off. And actually, and to be honest with you, some paintings really just work better on a smaller scale. This one was one of those where I knew I wanted a composition that was really compact, and the idea of molting kind of came from the show was about the garden because it's called A Breeze Through Fertile Gardens. So I'm like me thinking about, okay, flowers bloom, they open up. I try to use everything that I could about what's happening inside of a garden, and how can I use the form or the figure to kind of push that idea a little bit further. So the idea of molting came to where it's a flower pattern scarf, what have you, but that's opening up to the center, right? So what's more beautiful? Is it the flower on the scarf or is it the person underneath? So it kind of plays with that back and forth. And then there's just one eye looking at you. And I think that kind of has an effect too, as to you can't see the rest of her face, so you're kind of wondering what the expression is or what's happening. Is it a real person? And I kind of carved the flower to mimic the side of her face, if you can tell. So if you follow the stem all the way up, it kind of carves into her face, and then that part of the leaf that comes out, it almost mimics her mouth. So it has its own, like, she's alive, the flower on the scarf is alive. And it was really fun actually painting this one because I had to really practice a lot of constraint, keeping those hues so soft. And again, when you see it in person, it comes off a little bit better. And it's actually, a lot of people have actually said this is one of their favorites in the show. So it was really interesting, you know, and it is one of the on the smaller side of paintings in the show. So.
I like the way that you've played with the texture of the fabric, and that juxtaposes against her very beautiful and luminous skin. I think that's a really interesting contrast that kind of goes forth and back to the other. So
Right. Yeah, and it has a lot of sharp angles, so there's some points in there, and that kind of is contrasted with the softness of everything else. So kind of anytime I do work on a smaller painting, I try to pack as many layers as I can in there, whether it be composition or something that's going to really hold you. So.
okay. And then we see a new, to some people, it might be a new thing down here. If you look at the title, aluminum composite material. For those who are watching who may not be familiar, can you talk a little bit about what that is and why you use it?
Sure. So I'm going to give all the artists listening like a little hack, right? So throughout history, you know, the artists have painted on everything from granite to raw aluminum to walls to everything, right? And the most popular thing to paint on, I think it has to do with a lot of maybe just convenience, tradition, is linen or canvas. When I first started, that's what I was painted on because that's what my instructors painted on. That's what I learned. And again, I'm really an information junkie. So with me learning more about what's stable, what lasts the longest, what can I find, and seeing other artists use different things, I was always curious. So some artists may be familiar with something that they sell called dye bond, which is the same thing. And pretty much what it is it's a piece of raw aluminum, and it's sandwiched in between two thin layers of polyester. So the aluminum composite, or quote unquote dye bond, it won't react to the elements, meaning that it won't expand, it won't contract like wood or linen, because linen, that's why when you go to a museum, you see paintings that are cracked and all that. That's because over all these years, that linen has been just expanding and contracting due to the moisture. So it will eventually crack. Wood is probably the most stable substance right after linen or canvas, because it won't contract or expand as easily, but it still will, and wood rots. So so to fast forward, my research kind of led me to, like, I watch even videos on conservation. So I watch them like conserve paintings and do all this and all the behind the scenes stuff, because again, I'm just information junkie on art. So I found that I actually can get aluminum composite material from people who manufacture things for signage. So they're not selling to artists. So the hack is I can buy big sheets of this a lot cheaper, because I'm buying it from somebody who thinks I'm about to go do some construction, but if I cut it down and sand it and prime it, I can pretty much get it to a surface that I would use for painting. Because if you go and try to buy dye bond directly for artists, it's going to be they're going to tax you a little, because now they're selling to artists. Companies are in business. But if you find a company that's selling aluminum composite or dye bond just for construction purposes, you'll find it a lot cheaper. So that's my little artist hack there, to save some money on material.
Perfect. Always helpful. Okay, let's move on to Morning Dew. And this is another really beautiful one. Once again, we have the surrealist elements going on, which I think we can all see in the sphere and the floating rose petals around the woman's body, in how her wonderful wrap is blowing behind her and sort of elevated on its own. And one of the things I also want to point out to everyone, and it is this astonishing in person too, everyone, please look at this rose in her hair. It looks as if in real life too, you can go up to it, pluck it out of the painting and smell it.
It actually smells really good too.
It is astonishingly realistic. Do you strive for that, or was this a happy accident, or talk to me about that?
Right. So during the show, I've actually retired from painting flowers because of this show. I painted so many. And for, I don't know, with this flower, I spent a lot of time on it for sure. And I was buying flowers. So I had a whole pile of dead flowers. I painted it from life. I was setting up flowers and had them hooked to clamps and lighting it from different directions, because I wanted to get as much out of it as I could, just from my own, seeing it live right there. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where I just really wanted to get that flower right in this painting. I knew it was going to be a centerpiece, and I was already had a lot of practice on other paintings prior to this to get the flower to kind of look like that. So, and it just was and to answer your question, I strive for realism still, with a hint of storytelling, like a storybook look. So I want it to look real. Like, I want my figures to look real. I want things to look real, but I want it to be to a point to where you can see that there's still a little bit of imperfection. Like, oh, it's still a painting, and that plays with you as well. It goes back and forth with, oh, that looks real, really good. Like, from here, when I go up to it, it looks real still, but then you can see how it was all put together by just, pigment and oil, and all that mashed together. So it was really fun. It was really fun to paint that.
Well, and this one too, I think, is a really good example of the influence that Bouguereau has had on you. Central figure in the middle of the picture plane, which of course he loved to do. And you really are looking at how the light hits a human body. In what ways does it reflect? You've got these little kisses of light on her shoulders, this fabulous little kiss of light on her nose. So you are really looking at that, which of course goes right back to those masters of the late 1800s, which I think is really wonderful as well. And it's very obvious. And as we go forward in these, it's going to become even more obvious. You really pay attention to skin tone. You try to get that multi-layered look, as if as we real human beings have. We're not flat. We have luminosity and layers to our skin. And I think that's one of the things that I think is one of the most wonderful things about your art.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. One thing that I want to break this painting down really quick if I could.
Absolutely.
So this painting it is one of my favorites in the show, and I was really happy with some technical things that I did in regards to some of the skin. It'd be more better explained in person, but I want to break down some of the symbolism in this one, because this one is very layered. So this one is called Morning Dew, and as you can see, I'm going to give my wife is watching, I'm going to give her the credit for titling more than half of my paintings. So this painting, I did it maybe 3/4 of the way into the show, and I realized that throughout the whole show, there was a lot of life and beautiful things and things flourishing and blossoming, but I didn't approach the idea of death. And I wanted to do that, not in a morbid way, but I still wanted it to be where when you see it, you kind of know it, right? So she knew what I was looking for. So when she came up with its title at the end of the painting, it would work perfectly. So the word morning, not morning like the sun rising, but morning, and then dew, like condensation on your window type dew. And we just put those together to kind of give them whole morning dew. So to break this one down, so the first thing I want to break down is the flowers, and then this information is kind of always on the card. We had some it was a great idea that you had where we can write some cards to kind of tell the story of the painting a little bit more. So on the far bottom left, that's the rosebud. That's kind of life just starting. You move over to the far right at the bottom. That's kind of you young adult. You're finding out about life, and then the flower that we were discussing earlier. That's kind of like the prime of your life. That's like when you kind of have this enlightenment about, and this can happen at any age. So it really doesn't have anything to do with how you look. I think I was kind of looking at it more so when you finally realize who you are, your place in the world, what you can contribute, that type of thing. So that's the pinnacle of life, right? The very top. So she's looking down at a flower that's passed. I had plenty of dead flowers in the studio, so that was modeled after another flower. And that flower has passed, and the dew part of the title comes from that. You can't see it, but if you at the leaf that's right under the flower, there's a little drip of water coming down. So that almost represents, yes, right there. That almost represents like tears. So the flower has passed. That bowl that she's holding, that's been in a few paintings of mine. I have this kind of golden bowl, and she has that gesture of like, it's almost like a religious gesture where the hand is up and it's almost kind of like blessing the flower, that the flower is now passing or moving on. So that wind that you see is blowing off one of the petals. That petal goes up a little bit higher, and you see that the petal is starting to rejuvenate. That's next to her left ear. So it left as a dead flower and it's starting to rejuvenate. And then finally it reaches full bloom again near the sun. So the sun is dimmed down. The sun is almost in mourning as well. And that kind of completes the cycle. So now if you're a believer in reincarnation, that it ties into that. If you're a believer in just, whatever you believe in, I try to put a little bit of all of that in there. Around her neck, the way that dress is tied, that's actually somewhat of a universal symbol of mourning, because you know how the breast cancer awareness is the cross ribbon when it's pink. Well, they changed the color to black, so that kind of symbolizes mourning. You can't see it in this picture, but there's like 5 stripes across her abdomen in the dress, and that is representative of like the 5 stages of grief. And again, I don't expect everybody to like pinpoint all of this. I kind of put these things in as Easter eggs for myself, because it keeps me interested in adding more stuff to the painting. So so this one has a lot of layers to it, and it was actually painted at a time when my great aunt was in hospice, coincidentally. So I had a lot of time to think about what she was going through, and then she was about to make her transition, and me painting it. It was kind of a weird feeling, and I didn't paint it because of that. It just so happened that that was going on at the same time.
Well, and I love that you mentioned the hand gesture and you mentioned other faiths or spiritual life ways, because to me, I understand what you're saying about almost like the Catholic thing, but it also to me is evocative of a Buddhist mudra, which those of you who may not be familiar with mudras, they are sacred hand gestures that will help in your practice of Buddhism. You can also do it when you practice yoga, things like that. So they're hand gestures that have symbolic meaning in Buddhism. So
Ah, very cool, very cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to paint death in a beautiful way, pretty much.
Well, I think you definitely achieved that. This is a beauty. I do encourage everyone to come in. This is on view, as I mentioned, at the Appleton. And those of you who have not been in, please do make it in. This is a lovely painting. Now I wanted to go to Buglo so you can see center of the picture plane. Luminous, beautiful skin. Look at that hand. Buglo, of course, too, was looking at the way that light hits a human being. What gets illuminated, what doesn't, according to where the person is in space and according to the light source. So I want to go everybody to look at this for a moment, and then I'm going to go back to yours just to hammer home the analogy, because I see it very clearly.
Yeah.
That you're a
I
big
just,
fan. Okay.
yeah, and one thing I want to mention about this, I want to tie this back to what you mentioned about seeing things in person, because I've seen this painting in person many times at the museum. And one thing about this painting is that her face is in shadow, and it doesn't, you can't really tell it here in the image. You kind of can tell because her hands are a little bit more illuminated, but the way he controlled value in her face is just, it's simply amazing. And it's one of those things that it's fully appreciated by people who of course appreciate art, but it's even furthermore appreciated by people who attempt to do that type of thing in their own work. So when I see that, I just always just shake my head, because it's one of those things where it almost looks like a magic trick. Like you almost feel like he was, he knew something other people didn't about oil paint. So this is a perfect example of a painting you have to see in person, because the way he dropped her face in shadow and brought her hands forward was just amazing.
Yep, and of course, this is out of our permanent collection at the Appleton, so you can come see Andrew's show, and you can come see this on the same day. So moving on, now this is a study. You want to talk a little bit about how you kind of prep for a painting, if you will?
Sure, sure. So I work from models. When I first was learning to paint, and even now, because again I teach at the at Creality School of Art, and shout out to all my Creality staff and friends that are in the chat if you're there. So we work from live models. Models come in. We work from the human figure. So that we can see an actual breathing person. And I worked with Carol. She had models that would come in almost weekly. So we would have like models that we would draw from, portraits, figure drawing. So I got a lot of my learning from live things, like still lifes in front of me, people in front of me. And part of my practice now is I do work from reference, but I work from reference that I shoot myself and models that I find. So I will hire a model, and usually I have a few, maybe 1 or 2 pages of ideas sketched out for things. So we'll work together to kind of get reference for those paintings. And sometimes they'll do certain things that'll spawn an idea for a painting down the road. So what I do is once I gather my reference, I always do everything kind of like the hard way. So where I will do a full drawing, change things, add things to it. And drawing is it's I think it's the most important thing that an artist needs to learn and learn well in the beginning. So for everything that you see in the show, all of my work, I was always taught is to do a well balanced drawing. Um, for one to as a study to work out the proportion, to work out the gesture. Sometimes the drawings find their way into becoming something that you look back and you're like, oh, I could maybe throw a frame around this because it's it may come out pretty good, right? So not all of my drawings were meant for like to be exhibited. Sometimes they're just me working out ideas. Some of them are rougher than others. This one I pushed a little bit further because initially it was going to be just a standalone drawing. But then I decided to actually move forward with a painting for it. So it actually was just going to be a drawing by itself. And from there, it kind of reinforced the idea that, well, while I was doing the show, it reinforced the idea that I need to get some more drawings in the show just to kind of show the process and show the steps.
Yeah, I think that's a really wise idea. So this is, of course, the drawing. So let's look at the painting. There she is. And I like what you said, and thank you for the compliment about the extended labels. As an art historian, I mean, if you will, do art for a living, but I always like to hear, of course, if the artist is living, I like to hear from the artist. You can describe what is in your head better than I can surmise what is in your head. So it was really important for me, for you to get your voice out there about what your thought process was on your work.
Absolutely. No, yeah, it was really a great idea. I'm really thankful that we decided to do that because it helped open up the dialogue with the painting a little bit further because I put a lot of little Easter eggs in there and stuff and I want people to work but not too much. I like to help them along a little bit. Some along with this painting here, it originally was a feather that was floating. So it was a feather for the longest time. So that painting was done early 2020, and the paintings after a while I just turned them against the wall because I've already stared at them for hours and hours. And then so when the show started coming to the end, I started turning things around, seeing what worked, seeing what was missing. The idea to change it to a petal made sense because if I'm using in the title of the show is a breeze, I'm like, okay, maybe I can have this rose petal floating throughout the show. So I actually changed it to a petal instead of a feather, and I wanted her to give her a almost to where you don't know where the ground is. So that's part of the title too. Again, I played with titles, and it's called, instead of horizon, like the word horizon, it's her rising. So that's another play on words that I like to have in the work.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And it's funny, unless you know, you might at first glance surmise that this is actually pastel. It has a very pastel like feel to it and not necessarily an oil paint feel to it, which I also find very interesting.
Right, right.
So let's go to there's a question before we move on. There's a question I did want to ask you. Obviously you're of Jamaican heritage. We've had that in every single label. How much does your Jamaican heritage play in your artwork, if anything? Do you try to incorporate some, because of course it's an island nation. Do you incorporate that into your artwork or?
Yeah, so when I take breaks, I listen to Jamaican music.
Okay.
No, I'm just joking. No, I think some of the bold colors are in there. And again, my mother, she had a lot of artwork in the house that was really African centered. And I think more so what comes from there is that Jamaicans are very bold people, it's a very proud country. So I think that's why Boogaloo appealed to me also, because he puts his women, they're the bold center of attention type of thing. They're not meek. They're not hiding in a corner. They're not put on display as a still life, like, oh, I'm nude and I'm just hiding in a corner type of thing. It's like they're very empowered. So, and I think just that my family is Jamaican, my wife is Jamaican. So I think it's just, we're bold, proud people. And I always want to show that in the work. So if anything, it's more of a subconscious thing that I try to bring forward. And it and it's just something that I'm always going to continue to do, is make sure that the women are very empowered and very proud in the pictures, even though they're in a more meditative state. It's a very proud state as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
And then we have another beautiful piece. And one of the things I like, once again, you get a touch of that surrealism, because are the plants literally emerging from her body? Are they tucked into her head wrap and hair? I like that there's a little bit of ambiguity to
Yes,
several of your pieces as well. Do you want to talk maybe a bit about that?
sure. So so this one is another one of my favorites. And when I did this piece, the main thing was I wanted to highlight was hair. I wanted to, because women with dreadlocks, they they always look like roots to me. You know, the way they grow. Sometimes, you know, it depends on, some women have their hair that it grows out, some it grows down, but they always look like roots. And thinking about the show and thinking about how to tie that in there and highlight hair, I hired a model. She's actually an artist herself, and and I was sad because when she came to the show, she actually cut her hair a little bit, not all of it off. She just cut it shorter. But when we worked together, it was just this long flowing hair, and I'm sure she's growing it back. But so she had it, so I had her put it up because I had this sketch in my sketchbook of these leaves coming out of the sides of the face, and I was thinking about how can I play with roots and which direction they're growing and that type of thing. So when we worked together, the idea came about to where instead of the leaves reaching for the sun, because you know how plants, they'll bend towards the sun usually, I wanted the roots to kind of take the place of the plants, to kind of flip it on its head. So that, hence the title, When the Roots Bloom. So now the roots are actually the ones that are actually getting all the shine. They're the ones that are above ground. So I used the red scarf to kind of symbolize the ground, the red dirt. And then the leaves now are acting like the roots. And those are the ones that are pushing down and going further down to kind of give the roots its nutrients and kind of let the roots have its own shine. One little thing that it's not on the card, but I'll kind of share it here, because I kind of shared it with a few other people that came. So this painting actually works in reverse. So if you look at it like it's the sun, it's the roots of the hair, the ground, and the leaves, then her necklace will flip it back to its natural state, where it's the sun, it's the leaves, the ground, and the roots again. So so that's one of those things that I had fun playing with, that idea that it can be flipped either way, and just went with the title with that.
That's very clever. That's very cool. Yeah, of course, because it is very sun-like, the medallion or the locket that she's wearing.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's go on. Now this, we've seen some of your smaller pieces. We've seen your medium pieces, which we just saw. Now this is a big painting. And one of the things, it's the perfect painting to my mind to touch on your storytelling. We've kind of touched on your surrealist bent, but I think it's really interesting to talk about your storytelling, because when I first looked at this, I was wondering if this was a true folkloric story from some culture somewhere, because you have such a strong visual narrative. It looks like, oh, I should be able to go to a book and look this story up, but I guess that's not the case.
No, I don't. Yeah, I kind of let it all come from me, and I like to let it be an internal thing. That keeps it a little bit more interesting for me. This painting, it's like one of the hardest things I've ever done. It went through a lot of trials to get things to look the way they do. I did work with both of the models at the same time, um, and they were great. And actually, the model on the right, she is actually in a one, I think, either, yeah, she's in two other paintings. So she's the same model that's on the Aftermath painting, the one that was used for promotion,
Mhm.
the same model that's there. So this one's called Replanting, and this one is one that it first started in my sketchbook, and I like the idea of the figure having, like, echoing each other. There was a painting, I don't know by the, I think the painting is called, now again, this wasn't, I think this was a subconscious thing because it wasn't on the forefront of my mind when I was sketching, but there's a painting by Odd Nerdrum that I really like, and I think it's called Twilight. I might be wrong, but it's a bunch of men sitting down, and they're all in the same position, and they all have their head cocked back, and they're all kind of like howling at the sky, and it's really a haunting painting, and it has and throughout it is having this echo of figures. They're all doing the same thing. So again, this wasn't. I've seen the painting so many years ago. It wasn't. So it's probably a subconscious thing. But I wanted the figures to mirror, and it didn't happen that way right away. Because at first, the figure on the left, she was going to have that stance, and the figure on the right was going to be more of a languid type of pose, doing something else that was more kind of help move this story along. So I kept revising, and then eventually, when I mirrored the pose of the woman on the left to the right in my sketchbook, I'm like, okay, there's something here, because I find if you do a little research, you see that nature always mimics itself. Like you'll see that they'll do like a macro view of something, and they'll zoom in to a micro view, and it's like the same type of thing. So I like the idea of kind of nature mirroring each other. So once that hit in the sketchbook, the idea hit, then I was like, okay, I want them to have the same stance. And then from there, it's kind of like, what are they doing? So now, is she plucking the flower? Is she putting the flower back on? Where are they located? There's not really anything that really tells you like where this story is being held. I use the yellow wrap to kind of symbolize a little bit of the sun. She's one of the few also in the show that's making eye contact with the viewer. So, and the other one, you're not sure what she's exactly is feeling, because there is like a tear rolling down her face. So you're not really sure what's causing that, right? So, and then the flowers, again, this is part of the reason why I retired painting flowers, because those were those were very difficult. But many runs to the store to get flowers and just keep painting as many layers as possible to get them to look the way they look. So yeah, this painting was it was a long process, but I'm really proud of it.
It's really beautiful. And one of the things another thing I wanted to point out, you can absolutely see your admiration and to some extent, cognizant choices of that French academic. I mean, this is a classic French Academy background with all the very beautiful trees going back into the picture plane with mountains and a lake and this type of thing. It goes bingo, French Academy.
Yeah, I'm guilty as charged. Yeah.
But I love that, because these figures to me are really very modern. I mean, even though they do have an antiquated feel in some extent, they're also, I find them very modern. So you've taken these very modern people and put them in that very classic French Academy background, which I love that juxtaposition too. I think that's really visually interesting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I like what you said, because it's really hard to escape your times. So even though, I've seen thousands of paintings, but I looked at so many paintings of people from Amg and Bouguereau and Jerome and Leonardo da Vinci. It's kind of hard to escape the time you're living in. I know there's some people who can make figurative paintings that somewhat mirror 19th century, 18th century painting, but there's something about it when the world we live in, your paintings, you usually will reflect something of that. So even if I wanted to try to paint a 19th century or 18th century figure, I don't think I really could pull it off. I think it's always going to reflect the modern time that I'm in. I mean, backgrounds can change, because sometimes I'll have just backgrounds that are more so just to have certain colors play with each other and that type of thing. But when we're going for like a real background, you can kind of set that up how you want, but it's hard to escape your figures looking outside of the world you live in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really good point you brought up.
Yeah, well, I like your point too. That's yeah. It is hard to escape the times in which one lives.
Right.
Another thing that I wanted to mention to everyone before we leave the slides is I don't think I stressed this clearly enough. And Andrew touched on it very briefly. one of the things that I think is really wonderful, he created all new pieces for this show. So these weren't pieces that were lying around in his house. He created all new pieces specifically for the show. And I really thank you for that, because I think that's just fantastic.
Thank you. And there was about this much sweat that was coming off of my head every night.
Well, you're very calm via email, so you play it cool.
Yeah, I had to. I didn't want you to panic, right?
Well,
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It was definitely fun because one thing I also want to bring up too with the show and putting it together is that prior to the show, I think some of the work that you saw that I guess it caught your interest was a solo show that I had here locally, and it was through Creality, the curator Barbara Tiffany. Give you a shout out if you're watching, and she helped me put my first solo show together here, and that show was about the elements. So I use the elements kind of throughout my work, where it's earth, air, fire, and water, and I use those as like kind of like the springboard to get ideas for paintings, because I kind of put that in front of kind of put that in front of me and say, all right, what well can I pull from? And so when I thought about the show, I wanted to have touches of water, air, earth, and all that in the show as well. And that's part of the way the title came about, because if you think about A Breeze Through Fertile Gardens, a garden kind of needs all of that. It needs good soil, it needs good sun, the breeze, that's the air, and then the fire would be, I guess, the sun, the heat from the sun, and then the water. So I kind of tied my elements theme into the theme of the show, and it helped me keep my thoughts organized. So there is a flow through the show. The show has its own thread that runs through it. So it was really fun. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to create new work. So
cool. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing, so we're going to see you on screen again. Before we get to questions, and everyone, I wanted to encourage you, it looks like you're doing it, but everyone, I want to re-encourage you. If you have any questions for Andrew, please type them in the chat function, and I will get to as many as I can and read them to him, and he will answer your personal questions. If there's something you wanted to know about that we didn't touch on, I'm going to turn on a light because it looks like I'm in a cave right now. There we go.
Give me 1 second.
Okay, sure. Yeah, like as the sun sets, everything changes in our homes. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to Andrew about in a moment as well is advice he has. I know there are some painters on here. We, of course, are a campus of the College of Central Florida. And we do have students and novice painters come in, and I wanted to discuss that with him and talk about influences that he has as well. So I'll let you keep doing your thing there.
Yeah, I'm trying to get some light here.
No problem, I understand.
All right.
Okay. So one of the things, Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, one of the things as well, I just mentioned, we are proudly a campus of the College of Central Florida. So we, of course, have students, we have emerging artists coming in and looking at these wonderful paintings, and now your wonderful paintings. Do you have any advice for someone who may just be getting started with art? Give us your wisdom, please.
Right. I would say that when I first started, I was really relentless with finding somebody who can actually mentor me. I think mentors are very important. So when I would work with Terry, I wouldn't just take the class and say, all right, well, thanks for the class, and leave. I would pester her. I would send her emails. I would stay behind class to help. Hey, I was really serious. Can I wash your brushes? She allowed me to wash all her brushes but one. There was a fan brush that she wouldn't let me touch. But I was, so I think it's important to get mentors and find individuals that you can really kind of cling to. And if you are going to focus on getting better, I would try to focus on one style of art. When I say style or technique, meaning that artists that you may take a workshop or a class, and then workshop and classes are absolutely fine, but try to find one technique or one lane that you can really almost master. Because sometimes people will take a workshop with somebody who paints very loose and impressionistic, and another workshop with somebody who's almost really academic and really about the form. And that will kind of mix you up because their palettes are going to be different, the way they apply it, the paint's going to be different. So you really kind of have to have a laser focus in the beginning, no matter when you start, to try to master that first. The next thing is also drawing is the most important thing. So if you're struggling with painting, I feel you should stop painting and go back to drawing. Because when I first started with Carol, I showed her my little portfolio and I'm saying, oh, I did paintings and I did all this, but she's like, okay, that's nice and all, but here's a pencil and here's a sheet of paper and we're going to start all over, right? So it was one of those things where she forced, not I'm not gonna say forced, but she highly recommended that we start with drawing and continue that down that road, because that the drawing, it informs everything else. And as far as moving just forward, I think it's also important to give yourself restrictions. There was an interesting TED talk that I saw that said actually restrictions will actually breed more creativity. So a lot of times that's why I kind of narrowed. I said I'm only going to try to paint from the elements. Like I'm only going to use like earth, and I'm going to try to find ways to make that my thing. So doing that, it allowed me to be more creative and allowed me to kind of find my own voice, I would say, just doing that. So yeah, the art education, find a mentor, draw as much as possible, razor sharp focus. And then once you do get rolling, try to focus on one thing at a time.
Sorry, thank you for those wise words. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions. This is referring to replanting. And this person, Vicky, asks, what do the red collars signify, if anything?
Good question. So if you see the painting in person, what you'll notice is that it's a bunch of beads. And that was actually really almost painful to paint. Like that was, you're bringing back like, so memories about that. So anyway, if you look at the floor next to them, it's those same red beads are on the floor. And to me, they're almost symbolizing that those women are always walking around with the seeds around their neck. And that way they'll be able to kind of replant. So you can kind of see a couple of them near the foot of the woman on the right. And they're kind of scattered throughout there. So those are the seeds on their neck, seeds that I think that are on their neck that they're using to also replant, as well as maybe even putting those petals back on stems, because there's also an empty stem next to the foot of the woman on the left. It's in between the white rose and the right there. Yeah, there's an empty stem there. So it's almost kind of like to where they are now putting the petals back on the stems, and then they're also planting the seeds from their necklace.
Marvelous.
That's how I interpret it, but you can look at it any way you want, honestly.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to you. Let's see. I had them up and they went away for a minute. Just one second. Somebody clearly who knows you was teasing you about flowers and how you feel about those.
I know who that was too.
Okay. This is a comment and then a question. Suzanne says, I was so impressed with your work at the museum. What struck me most was the softness of the skin and backgrounds. The brushwork is invisible and the glow seems real, even though it is obviously a flat object. I love the smoothness of the aluminum composite. Oops, forgive me. The brushwork is invisible. And what kind of brushes and oil paints do you use, and how do you get that magic?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I paint in multiple, like when you paint on a very smooth panel or canvas, or it's you can't cover everything in just one go. So I use synthetic brushes. I don't use any really hog bristle brushes, maybe for like a background. And when I'm painting, I don't really lay the paint down in tiles. I more so almost paint like in a scrubbing fashion. And when I'm doing that, I have just over time and the kind of like the softness of the brush will kind of keep it from having any heavy brush strokes. If there is any brush strokes that are kind of distracting, maybe it's in a certain part of the body that it's kind of distracting for me, I'll use just a fan brush and just gently just swipe it away. It's not really so much of like a blending like this, like back and forth, back and forth. It's more so the synthetic brush will put it down to a way where it's not going to give me much strokes. And also if I see anything that's kind of distracting, I will just use a fan brush, but no hog bristles. It's just pretty much soft and synthetics, medium to soft.
Okay. Ken says, great work. Very proud that you're part of Creality, is blessed. One thing I want to say too, to those of you from Creality who were instrumental in Andrew's journey, I also want to thank you for having him draw, because I think this is my personal opinion. You could correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, because I'm not an artist, I'm an art historian, but I've dabbled before. And one of the things that I think is so extremely hard to do with the human figure is get the proportions correct. Obviously, the ancient Egyptians had trouble with it because they made that lovely grid to literally map out where the shoulders are versus where the waist. So you have got that down. Your figures never look off to me. They look extremely right in how a human body looks.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah, one of the best. So Carol, my previous art instructor, she came to the show, and one thing she commented on, which made me feel good, was that she said that I really see there's the drawing in the painting. So a lot of people like, so there's a little section with drawings, but when you look at any painting, it's always a painting that's successful, in my opinion. If you take away all the color and everything, is just good drawing. So when she commented on that, because she was looking at a painting and then she was talking about drawing, I felt really good. That was really like a huge compliment that I got, is that she noticed that. Because to me, no, color is the fun part. The part that's really gonna kind of test you and make you sweat a little bit is the drawing. So I take as much time to get that right as possible. And so anytime I see a drawing or a painting with great drawing, I take my hats off to, because I know what it, well, for the most part, I know what it takes to kind of get things to look like that. I mean, even paintings that aren't even on bigger scales, that I have yet to do like a big 10-foot by 20-foot painting, but when I see those and I see all the drawing and everything, like you said, doesn't look off, it's almost a miracle.
I agree. Jose says, beautiful work, Andrew. Can you talk a little bit about your paint preparation and mixing?
Yes. What's going on, Jose? Thanks for joining. So Jose is an art friend of mine. He's a very good painter himself, and so I'm glad he joined tonight. So paint and mixing. When one thing that I learned from Carol was to prep everything. So when I paint, one thing that's maybe a little bit weird about me is that I know some artists, they'll say, hey, what palette do you use? And they'll say, okay, I use white, I use cadmium red. I actually don't have a set palette. So I actually will just mix the colors that I need for what I'm painting. Now, when it comes to the skin tones, now those are very controlled and they're very teachable. Like I had a workshop where last year where we were doing a Bouguereau copy. So we took one of his portraits and we're doing that. So I had everybody mix color strings. So you have little puddles of paint all down your palette, and you take an hour and a half to mix all those out, and then you paint. And that actually saves time while you're painting. So I have a lot of my flesh tone, well, a lot of the colors that I would use to mix flesh tone, they're already pre-mixed based off of the color wheel. And when it comes to painting any background or any still life work, I will pre-mix colors, and if I have any left over, I will put it I would seal it up really good and put it in the fridge so I can or the freezer to use it maybe like a day or two later. Oh, so everything's very controlled.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Another question, and I may mispronounce your name. It's I think Lilia or Lilia, I'm not sure.
Hey, Lilia.
Prior to taking classes at Creality, were you artistically inclined? did you used to paint and draw as a child, or did you start painting with zero skill and learn this talent?
Right. So to go back, my first, I'll tell you my first artistic inspiration. I have, and I want to meet him, and I should have made a more effort to meet him when he came into town. But actually, I was very influenced by comic book artist Stan Lee, not Stan Lee, Jim Lee, because I had the X-Men book when I was younger, so I would be copying that all the time, and so I was always drawing, and I still have drawings. As weird as it sounds, I still have drawings that are like 30 years old that I did when I was a kid. So I always had an inclination for drawing, and I was always trying to get right proportion and right get things to look correct. But it wasn't until 2009. So I my first painting I ever did was in December 2009 in Terry's workshop. So that's the first time I ever touched oil paint. So everything you see has just been 10 years of just putting in the work and learning that. But I've been drawing for a long, long time.
Okay, thank you. Victorious asks, is the audience a concern when coming up with a concept? And do concepts have to be married to a particular theme, or is that just a way for you to challenge yourself creatively?
So, hey Vic, thanks for joining as well. He's another representational painter. So thanks for joining. Um, Audience, do I keep the audience in mind? I do, because I paint a lot of women, and I'm always very conscious of the way women perceive themselves, because if we look back at art history, women have always, they always hasn't been kind to women. It may have them in more ways that don't show the women can be more powerful than what they are and their role in society. So I'm very conscious of more so the women that view the work and how they see themselves. So I make sure that there's certain boundaries that I don't cross. Like, I don't really get into painting anything erotic or overtly sexual. There's nothing, if you decide to paint that, that's fine. But it's just that's in the forefront of my mind, because a lot of the images that I grew up with were of women that were doing, like, my mother has paintings um, of a woman reading a book to her daughter. Her daughter's in her lap, they're reading a book together. And there's always more domestic scenes, and it's nothing that would be offensive. So I think when painting, I know that my mother is watching, my wife is watching, other women, you know what I'm saying? So there's certain lines that I don't cross, and it feels good to be able to paint images that that women in my life and the audience can be proud of, and they can share, and it just shows them in a different light.
Wonderful, thank you. Linda asks, where in Florida are you located?
I am located in the hot Orlando area. So I'm in Orlando. I'm not far from Winter Park, where Creality School of Art is located. And I'm actually not far from UCF. So if you're familiar with the University of Central Florida, I'm actually maybe about a 10-minute, 12-minute drive from the university as well.
Marvelous. Gwendolyn asks, do you have prints available of these works?
Oh no, I don't have any prints yet. That's actually been something that I've been thinking about for a long, long time. I was considering it for something for this show. I haven't decided on which one it would be or what I would do, but no prints as of yet, but it may be a possibility soon.
Wonderful. That's pretty much it from what I see the questions. So a lady says drawing is my weakness. I'm still trying to get the right proportions. So the struggle is real. Mel writes, I use synthetic brushes as well. So yeah, just support, a lot of praise for you in the chat, which of course you can see, because incidentally, everyone, we're recording this and it will be up on our YouTube channel. So you all can share, Andrew can share, you all can go back and revisit if there's anything that you wanted to look at or revisit. Oh, real quick one from Alva. Do you have any workshops in the future?
Yes. Yeah, I just went into the chat and saw that question myself. So yes, I have a workshop in December at Creality. I'm doing a figure painting sketch workshop. So we'll be pretty much taking, it's a 2-day workshop. So each day we'll work with one model, and we'll use maybe the whole day or half the day to do an oil painting sketch of them. Something that would be more so resemble what you would do for like the preparatory work for a final painting, which is always important to do studies and learn about the human figure that way. That's all what I have on the horizon. And other than that, I have an ongoing class that I teach every Tuesday at Creole. So I do life drawing, and we have students come in. We work from a model for that time. But I plan to do a lot more workshops in the next year, and also maybe some online mentoring. I've been thinking about dabbling into that realm to really kind of help other artists and kind of assist those who were in positions that I was at some years ago, just looking for somebody that they can, hold on to and, and learn from. So looking to do that.
Wonderful. And I wanted to mention, there was a gentleman, I told Andrew I would mention this if the gentleman isn't online, and I haven't seen him saying anything, and I haven't recognized his face. So I wanted to mention something. It was really interesting. I like to walk the galleries, and just sometimes I like to overhear conversations and hear what people are saying about the art. And there was a gentleman looking at Andrew's art, and he said, one of the things I think is so wonderful, he said it's as if everyone is lifted or floating. There's a lightness to his work. And I thought that was a really lovely compliment.
Yeah, no, that's very nice. Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I try to make sure that that everybody in the paintings, even the models, after they see them, they look and feel empowered with them seeing. So that's probably coming through. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Absolutely. One thing I also want to mention to everyone who can get here, I know some people are tuning in from other places, but here in Ocala, Florida, Andrew is going to give a tour of his work twice on September the 4th, which is our first free Saturday. So that's the good news too. It's free. He will be doing the tour at both 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. So you can come meet him. You can talk to him in person. He can talk about his art right in front of it with you, which is really exciting. So we invite you all to come down and meet Andrew and participate in that. And I'm seeing lots and lots of work on Zoom. So you might want to get going on the Zoom thing with teaching, because about 5 people have said that now, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. No, it's really something I'm really at a point now where I would love to give back more. Helping students in person is great, but I know, due to what's going on in the world, and some people they're all over the country, and they really want to learn and get better, and I'm all for that. So that's coming. Stay tuned.
Good. Well, everyone, that seems to be the last of our questions. Thank you so much. I do want to mention again, this is an ongoing series. It happens once a month, usually on the 3rd Thursday of the month. Occasionally we tweak it if there's a holiday or something. These will keep going and end after the December one. So we've got several more of these coming. Our next person is the fabulous textile artist Sharon Carey Harlan. Fabulous piece we own of hers. It is called Woman with Roosters. She is heavily influenced by West African figures, and additionally, fascinating, her uncle was a graphic artist. So there's a very graphic, almost mid-century element to her art too, and she just marries them so well. She will be on Thursday, September the 16th with me talking about her art as well. So we invite you to come back. We invite you to get on appletonmuseum.org to see future artist outlooks that are coming. And I want to thank you all so much. Your support is so appreciated. We love to do these. This is, I'll admit it, it's great fun for me. It's lovely to speak to these talented artists. So we really appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Andrew, you're the bomb. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Come see his show. It is amazing. It is on view at the Appleton on the 2nd floor right now.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you having me, Patricia. I really appreciate you taking the chance on me back in 2019 to get something together for you. And it was great. And thanks to everybody that joined in tonight and for the great questions. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. Good night.